So could I ask the speakers to come up and we'll just have some questions. Sarah, Marshall, Martin, Bobro, Carolyn, could you come up and there are hand mics over there. If you have questions, there are microphones, you can see the numbers. If there are any questions, just get up and ask. The program is being webcast, and in fact there's already a question that's come in, which I suppose is directed a little bit at Carolyn, but also at Martin. So this is from Elena Acuna from Spain, and the question that she had was, how long does it take between a research application going in and the approval of that application? And I suppose it depends a little bit about whether it's data or samples, and also kind of the issues that cause delays. So I don't know whether, Carolyn, you might kind of kick off, and then Martin, you could add if you wanted to.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, from my slides, I think for data-only projects, we've got an average of 24 weeks from application being submitted to getting to the stage where data is released. For sample applications, it's a lot more variable. There's a lot more of the finer details to kind of fine-tune a little bit. I think points which are sticking points, as we said, certainly for data projects, is the selection of the correct data fields for the research, which is something that we are trying to address with the release of the standardized basket to make sure that it's easier for researchers to select the correct data fields more quickly, and that there is less time taken during these amendments to bring down the application timelines.
I suppose one of the big things that you were commenting on the basket, the big time consumers are the researcher selecting individual data points, then going back to the research team, and the research team saying, in the UK Biobank, saying, well, if you want that data point, you should get these data points, and going back and forward, and in the end, everybody ending up with much the same data, which is this idea of a standardizing baskets, which we just then make available. Is that?
Yes, so I think that the standardized basket, we're moving towards a situation where we're happy to make all data fields available, all non-restricted data fields available to all researchers. You don't need to justify your requirements for various data fields. And with the standardized basket, the idea is that it's more of you could select all of the imaging data at the click of a button rather than having to go through and select all the individual data fields. So it'll make it easier to not miss anything that is going to be of significant importance to being able to conduct your research project.
Martin, I don't know whether you had anything you wanted to add in terms of the things that delay on the samples, or?
Well, I think just to emphasize one sentence, that the delays in data-only applications are almost entirely mechanical. They're filling in forms and getting agreements and paying money and stuff like that. And I'm sure we can do better, and the applicants can do better. It's getting better fast, and the process has changed recently, so it will get better anyway. Sample applications are the absolutely upside down. Most of the delay is about arguing on the content, whether it does go or doesn't go, whether it makes the cut or doesn't make the cut. And looking at averages is almost meaningless, because some of them are resolved quite quickly and some of them drag on. I think they've been dragging on since I joined 3 years ago, some of them. And some of them will probably drag on after I'm dead.
I can't see, actually, if there are any other questions. Is there a question over there? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much for your excellent talks. So I have two questions. One is, as the UK Biobank, I know that there's 500,000 participants, but I was wondering if there were any considerations to expand that pool, especially to people who are perhaps older and younger. So that's my first question. And the second question I have is, there are other countries with similar biobanks, and I was wondering if there was any considerations for collaboration with those countries so there could be some harmonization of the data moving forward?
I can certainly comment on the second question, that the Wellcome Trust and the NIH particularly, along with the MRC, have been encouraging the idea of what they call the 100,000 cohort. So bringing together groups from across the world that have established particularly blood-based cohorts of at least 100,000 and looking at ways in which they can share expertise and maybe looking at ways in which those cohorts can all be enhanced in ways that encourage collaboration, interaction, sharing of data. I don't know whether someone on the panel wanted to respond to the first question. Sorry, could you repeat the first question?
The first question is, are there plans to increase the original database, enhance the original database, by including people who are older, younger, different ethnicities, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I think this comes back to the community out there. What would make it better? And certainly I know that there are some people who put together a proposal that, hey, what about recruiting the children or even the parents, if we get our move on, of the participants. So I think it's for the community to say, how do we make UK Biobank better, for people to come up with ideas for that, persuade the funders. We're game, absolutely game. There was a question over here, and then one at the front, number one.
Hi, this is Kristen Weller from Michigan. Briefly, I do have an answer to her question. There is a movement towards assembling all the global biobanks together for meta-analyses. It's being led by Eric Lander, Ben Neal, Cecilia Lindgren, and others, so that all the biobanks can harmonize their phenotypes, harmonize analyses, and perform meta-analyses across many different phenotypes. So that is happening. It's just starting, just getting rolling. My question maybe is a little bit technical, but for us the biggest delay was having the MTA signed by our institution. And after speaking with other people, I realized, oh, you could actually request that MTA to be modified, so certain things my institution wouldn't agree to, we had removed. And I wondered if there was a way to either make that information available to everyone, or have, if you're willing to modify that MTA for some institutions, why not just remove those? For example, some of the statements aren't really valid in the United States.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jonathan Sellars, who's our legal counsel, is certainly open to reasonable proposals, and the whole UK Biobank, in a way, is an experiment of how do you make things open access, how do we streamline access, how do we make the MTA such that it isn't an obstacle. On the other hand, it's impossible to negotiate 1,000 different MTAs, so it's trying to do it in a way that there's a really good reason for change, and then we make those changes as a standard thing. There was one question at the front here, and then I think one final one over there. We'll do this one here. Sorry, it's right at the front. Down here.
Hello, Neil Walker, NIHR Bioresource. In discussing access, we haven't mentioned participants accessing their data. What has been the response to GDPR and the possibility of subject data requests, particularly as that may lead to an emphasis on feedback if you are giving people data that you are claiming not to have fed back to them?
So I'm going to ask if Jonathan Sellars is nearby. He can get up and get to a microphone. We'll come back to that with Jonathan. Yeah, he's got a microphone.
Got a microphone. Just that's quite a quick answer to that, which is that, like all research resources, either under the previous legislation or under the current legislation, we're not actually obliged to respond to subject access requests for data. And and as and when we're asked to do so, we don't. We explain why. We explain why that we don't, and that's entirely consistent with the basis on which all the participants were consented.
And we did write to all the participants to explain the new regulation and the issues around it. So, final question.
My question is to the bioethicist. I think I heard you say that the penetrance of most pathogenic mutations were less than what is published. I happen to come from Iceland, and we have insight into the sequence of the genome of the entire nation. And with rare exceptions, the penetrance of pathogenic mutations that have been reported is fairly accurate, and no less than has been reported. So I'm interested in finding out where you get your data from.
So I think the penetrance is different depending on how it's selected. So what we know about a lot of mutations is if they've been ascertained on the basis of a strong family history, for example, and then if you ascertain them in a general population, it can be very different. And that's perhaps no surprise for anything less than 100% penetrance.
But I have data on an entire population, and it's not biased by any family structure, except just the family structure that exists in the entire nation. So I think you're incorrect.
Okay.
I think it is dangerous. I think it's dangerous to try to convince people that the penetrance of the mutation is less than it really is.
Sure, I would not want to do that. I would not want to convince anyone that the penetrance is less than it really is. But I think there is very compelling evidence that penetrance is less than it has been reported, and that therefore the expectation is. So there's lots of mutations out there so there may be some out there like, for example, Huntington's, that of course the penetrance is going to stay very high, however you ascertain it. But for other conditions, the penetrance will be less if you don't select it for those familial factors. And I think that's a good argument not to rush into feeding back things that you find in a general population, because you don't necessarily know then what it will predict in the future for that person.
I think this one might run and run.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'll hand over now to Gil McVeigh, who's going to introduce a section on genetics. You're there, great. Thanks very much, Gil. Thank you.